On 1+1, the Salvos' never-ending march to end poverty, cultures collide in Western Australia, and Indonesia's former pop diva on why the pen is mightier than the mic. Hello, I'm Jane Hutcheon. Welcome to the program. Linda Bond is the Canadian-born Eastern Territory Commander of the Salvation Army in Australia. Fondly known as the Salvos, the Army is an evangelical Christian church founded by William Booth in London in 1865. It's now based in 120 countries with a mission pure and simply to provide charity without discrimination. The Salvos are about to launch Salvos Legal, a commercial law firm which will help to fund free legal representation for those who couldn't otherwise afford it. Linda Bond believes despite the resilience of the economy through the global financial crisis, more and more Australians are in need. Commissioner Linda Bond, thanks so much for speaking with 1+1. How do you see the role of the Army in Australia today?
I find the Australian public love the Salvation Army. I've served in England and Canada and America, and they all have a great respect for the Army. But the public here love the Salvation Army. And I think what they see is Christianity with its sleeves rolled up. I think we're people with a real heart for God. It used to be our slogan, heart for God and hand to man. And I think that's what we try to do. And basically I think that's how the public see us.
A recent report by the Salvos found that 2 million people in Australia were living in poverty. What does this tell you about the way we're living at the moment?
We're in dire times for a lot of people because the poor almost has a new definition now. We're looking at a working poor. And we have people who probably did very, very well, but in the economic crisis and some of the things that have happened, now they just don't have the cash flow. They're having to use their credit cards, they're having to use their savings, they're having to borrow money. And I think the gap between the rich and poor is getting wider. And what happens for the Salvation Army, now we're dealing with more people. We had 80,000 more different people come to us for help. So we're seeing we'll never be out of work.
Does that surprise you? Australia is a first world nation. It's a relatively rich nation. It's also done fairly well in the recent global financial crisis. Does it surprise you that you're getting those kind of numbers?
Yes, I think we're all surprised. That's probably why the Salvation Army has come up and said we need to do some speaking to the government, speaking to agencies to address some of the issues, because we do believe things could change if there were different strategies, different structural changes, and looking at the nature and the impact of poverty in Australia.
Let's just take, for example, children and youth. How could the situation change there?
We feel that there needs to be a child poverty strategy to be looking at the number of children in homes where there's joblessness, or in the homes of single moms who are most affected by this. We also feel that there needs to be a strategy or programs developed so that our children have every opportunity academically, so nobody's disadvantaged. Personally, I feel for the Salvation Army, I really think that we need to look at the whole thing of our ministry with children, because to me that's not just the future, and it is the future, but this is our present, and there's situations that I think as a population and as a Salvation Army we need to address. We need to be there for kids. The homelessness with our teens, we've done some study on why is this so? Well, we found out it's so because as children, they've been neglected, or there's not been resources there to help them, either in the home or in the school or in the community. I think the Salvation Army wants to do something in terms of programming for these children.
Youth crime is becoming an increasing concern, and actually Tasmania is due to trial a dedicated children's court next year to deal precisely with youth justice. In your view, is it the justice system that's at fault, or are there other underlying issues there?
There's always a danger. We could just sort of blame a system or a part of society. I think it's far too complex. I think with children, at least some of the children we've seen, when you know their story, it's before they ever get to the justice system, but when you know their story, you think, I understand why that child behaves like that or acts out like that. I'm not excusing youth, but we do see a lot of people you would have to have compassion for. And we, even in the justice system, when they arrive at that point, I think the Salvation Army and other churches, agencies need to come alongside and say, we do believe in transformation. Yet no, because somebody gets off the rails as a teenager, that's not the end of the story.
How did you come to be part of the Salvos?
And I was born into the Salvation Army, into the Church of the Salvation Army, and was there all my life. And I became an officer not because I chose to be a Salvation Army officer, but I really believe God called me to be a Salvation Army officer. So I've been one now for about 42 years.
Does it concern you that growing numbers of Australians are turning their back on the Christian message and yet are still very desperate for the Salvos' assistance?
As a Christian, we truly believe that Jesus Christ is the answer to the deepest human need. And everything else is, there's lots of things that are really good, but they're not going to solve the heart problems. And if there was ever a time in Australia where people need to reconnect with the church in order to reconnect with God, or reconnect with Jesus Christ during the Christmas season and realize there's something more to this than just a seasonal emphasis, it's a sad thing, but I do believe things are going to turn around.
Do you understand it?
I think every society from the beginning of time, if they think they can get along by human ingenuity, it will. Maybe I'm just being philosophical about that. I just think that's the way we operate until sometimes we fall flat in our face. No matter what the circumstance is, I have, lots of people have. Sometimes that's when you look up, and you discover there is a God, and there is a God who can make the difference in your life. That's what happened to me. So it was good news to me, so I don't mind telling other people about the good news.
The Salvos are about to launch a commercial legal firm called Salvos Legal. Is the aim of that simply to raise revenue?
No. And so what we're trying to do is a commercial firm to do things like conveyance, and then the money from that, from the firms that would pay us to do that, would then be used for legal purposes to give people who can't afford a lawyer. What we don't want to do is we don't want in any way to try to take the legal aid money and say, can we have some legal aid money? Because they're already probably strapped for funds. So what we say is, how can we get money and do the same kind of thing and let somebody get the advice? So we're doing it with a commercial firm and then sort of the humanitarian or the social justice.
So it'll be a legal firm, but the prices will be lower than if you went to a normal firm?
In terms of the conveyance, I don't know if the prices will be lower. What they want to do is get the money from the commercial, and it's the money from the commercial firm, the profit from the commercial firm, that will be paying for the lawyers to give free advice to those who can't afford it. So the Army won't be getting the money for the Salvation Army. It will be getting the money to be used for the issues of those who are marginalized.
And why go into this area?
Because there's a need. And Salvation Army territories around the world are so fascinated by it, they want to get in on it. So I would expect we'll see more of it.
And thank you so much for speaking with us on 1+1.
Thank you very much.
Writer Kim Scott is a descendant of the Noongar people in Western Australia. He began writing after becoming an English teacher, and he set out to research his family's history. His novels have been described as semi-autobiographical, dealing in particular with Australia's assimilation policies of early last century. 10 years ago, Kim Scott became the first Indigenous writer to win the Miles Franklin Award. His latest novel, That Dead Man Dance, published this year, continues continues his exploration into the Noongar people's relationship with British colonialists.
Kim Scott, thanks very much for speaking with 1+1. Your father had Aboriginal heritage and your mother had European heritage. Over the years you've written and spoken a lot about identity. Do you think you ever come to a stage where you're comfortable with an identity?
That's a good question to start with. Yeah, I mean, I'm comfortable now and I think I always have been, but it's just my perverse nature to explore and to want to articulate it more adequately, probably.
Why do you say perverse nature?
Well, because there's angst associated with it, I think, and it's a search that means you're making things difficult for yourself in many ways. So the who am I, given, who am I in this place, is probably what informs a lot of my writing. And that's to try and understand what does it mean to be, stuff that I've written about, someone who is a descendant, continuing long line of people that lived here forever, virtually, in the southwest. How did I get to be someone who thinks of themselves as a child, as of Aboriginal descent, which is already a very diminished position, but to be proud of that.
So, firstly, what did you want to say about Indigenous Australians in this novel?
Writing fiction, I don't start out with wanting to say anything in particular, but what inspired me in the material I came across was the wit, sophistication, compassion and spiritual generosity of Noongar individuals at a time of first contact. And I found it really postmodern of those characters to be at once really regional, attached to the spirit of place, but so ready to reach out and accommodate and embrace, really, the other, which a lot of our shared history is the way it's normally told, is not like that at all.
So what did you want to say about the early colonisers?
They're outnumbered, they recognise that they're not in a powerful position, they are impressed quite often with certain Noongar individuals, with their intelligence and their wit, and probably they feel a little bit insecure in themselves.
So what was the relationship between the groups of people like at the time?
It's called, some historians have referred to this area as the friendly frontier, because there's quite strong human relationships. And in the diaries they will recognise who the landlords are. Between individuals there's some really strong relationships, singing, attempting to share worldviews and metaphysics.